Did you notice this part here on page 6?
This is looking
Um,
okay. Yeah.
on page 6,
Hmm.
blah blah blah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down. In those old frog songs, I
Yeah.
have told you, the priests in their rain charms identified themselves with the frogs. When there was a drought, the priests sang the frogs' songs as if it had rained. They imitated the frogs as they sing after the rain because they feel well then in their ponds. But when there is no water, there is nothing to sing about. As primitives also, in order to produce rain, imitate the fall of raindrops, blah, blah, blah. Did you notice that?
Yeah. I want to know what you're referring to exactly though.
Well, in your in our conversation last time, you spoke of
Yeah.
the Song of the Frogs.
Yeah. Fucking crazy. When I read that, I'm like, no fucking way. And I never read this in my life. You know, like I'd speak of I'll tell you about an experience I had, and maybe on in the lines of have I talked about these concrete details of what happened and stuff. I was talking to her about a trip I had to Montreal like 2 years ago, and me and my friends went to go hiking, and we got lost on the mountains, and we had to walk our way down the mountain to get back to like the resort, and it was like a 4 hour walk. And as we were walking, and this is like in the wild, and I heard like this song as we were walking. And then I was like, oh, like this is like a beautiful melody. And then um when I like listened to it again, I realized it was frogs. And
Hmm.
it was like a group of frogs that were singing a melody. And I was like, holy shit, this is beautiful. And I associated with that memory the concept of home and the concept of returning or comfort and like returning back to my childhood. So like those were the free associations that came up. Then as I was talking, I'm like I kept calling it like, the song of the frogs. It was a beautiful song of the frogs. And I was like, wait a minute, like when I was in um kindergarten, the mascot of my class was a frog. And I remember for a couple of years of my childhood, my mother would get me like frog amulets and frog like keychains and stuff. And I was like, holy shit, and then like I and then like so I went from this memory of frogs and stuff hiking to my of me being, in kindergarten, and my associations with like or my maternal associations with my teacher who had big tits, to my mother giving me keychains of frogs and stuff. And then and sometimes like it's just an example, but like then I expand upon that, and then like what I truly feel comes up, and I'm like, hey, this is like, you know uh
Right.
it struck me. uh does that happen to you, like when you read texts and stuff, like um
Well, this happens. So this is called synchronicity,
yeah.
right? This is what Jung calls synchronicity. And synchronicity is another very difficult concept in Jung because you were talking about something very personal about the Song of the Frogs. There's no way you could have known. And then the reading that we assigned ourselves that very week
Yeah.
gave this very beautiful discussion of the Song of the Frogs, and even something about the meaning of the frogs, that when it rains they're happy,
Yeah.
and when it doesn't rain they're sad, and so the priests have to come in and they have to sing for them,
Mm.
and hopefully that will make the rain come again.
Yeah.
right? And so there's a kind of causal confusion between the rain makes the frogs sing, but when the priests sing for the frogs, then the singing makes the rain come.
Mm.
So this is a when you find a synchronicity, you also find this kind of causal confusion.
Mm.
Okay. Um, which the fact that this thing itself has a causal confusion in it may or may not be related to your actual synchronicity.
Mm.
Uh, because that's the whole problem of synchronicity is like, do you believe in the mystical or not? Right? Like, do you believe that there's some real meaningful connection between this event where you
Yeah.
uh right? But to fully go into the synchronicity would be to read this here as something of an answer to your
Mm.
frog problem,
Mm.
like that it's giving you an answer,
Yeah.
and then it really does become like a religious vision,
Yeah.
right? Like you learn how to listen to God. God's giving you an answer, and that's just purely very natural religious hermeneutics,
Mm.
right? Like that's how one reads the signs of God,
Yeah.
and so you also have that in Jung, and you have this issue of the synchronicity. And again, for some people, it kind of stands out as a sore thumb because, like, but you also have psychology and so forth, right? Um, Meaning, what I mean by you have psychology and so forth is that, like, there's no such thing as God, really. There's a self. Everything is to be interpreted in terms of a collective unconscious. Um, so why am I saying all of this? Well, I'm saying all of this because my understanding is that you were just talking now about what is there besides the constant process of individuation. And I think that's why my mind went to these frogs, because it is the answer in the sense that why does synchronicity happen? Well, I think that synchronicity happens because it is a place where the mind, where your consciousness is hooking into the concrete meaning of
Mm.
your actual life
Mm. 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 Mm.
rather than being in this world of ideas,
Yeah.
right? And there's this like, okay, and then this experience is extraordinarily meaningful. And I don't think that one can say positively whether there's like that it's just chance or whether it's supernatural, because I
Yeah.
think that's an antinomical problem. I don't think there's a way to decide the answer. But I do think that when something like this appears, it is an imperative to the consciousness to concretize. In other words, the apparent correspondence or coincidence calls consciousness to pay more attention to your actual life.
Mm.
And thus, this issue of like, do you just keep individuating and individuating, right? Well, that's what it might look like if you're not being concrete about your actual life.
Mm. Mm.
But if you become capable of digesting
Yeah.
your actual life and all of the various interpretive frames that you can put on it start to wash away, and underneath it becomes the appearance of the actual life itself. Or maybe I shouldn't even say appearance, because what appears is the object of, if you go back to like my distinction about object, and the object should be your life.
Mm,
And your life is a object that expands from birth to death, and it's your actual life, and
mm,
that should be your object. Now, there's a way you can read Jung as saying the very same thing, because that would be the self,
yeah.
and the self is an actual life. But does Jung succeed at producing a language for that
Yeah.
himself and
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
it himself?
Yeah.
I don't know. Does it matter? Like, if I can get it out of him, then maybe it doesn't matter, because what matters is that I can do it myself,
Mm,
for myself.
yeah.
So that goes back to this issue I was talking about earlier, where it's like, I said in the very beginning, like, well, what I see strongly in Nietzsche is that Nietzsche's really more concretely historical in some way, despite how like mad he is and how he's talking about camels and
Lions and babies.
lions and babies and gravity and everything. But like he's like no, like the death of God happened now, and it's a concrete thing, and it's singular, and nothing has ever happened like it before,
Mm,
right? um and so I think what I'm saying is that there's a way that one can raise oneself up into a fixture of interpreting history the same over and over again, and that is actually a intellectual distancing from one's actual life.
mm,
It's a way of learning to distance oneself intellectually from one's actual life.
mm,
I think Jung probably knew that he did that.
mm,
Like he knew that that was a difficulty that he had.
mm,
Um, and that's fine. So yeah, so that's all I wanted to say about, like, he has this thing called synchronicity,
yeah.
and the synchronicity is calling someone to the concreteness of their actual life, because the way to resolve or dissolve the what he calls the numinosum, I think, of
Mm,
the synchronicity is to become more concrete
mm,
about your entire life,
yeah.
so that the whole thing becomes concrete and not just the numinosum.
Mm, mm, mm. And I think that's where we should give props to Jung. And I think this kind of answered our question before when we were talking about like his, insistence of using symbols constantly and stuff, and like, it's just an image and but when
Yeah,
but when there's synchronicity and there's this interaction with the symbol that
yeah,
forces you to that literally brings you to the concrete,
yeah,
like your being, like
yeah,
ontologically brings you down. Uh,
yeah.
you profess and you say, yo, Young is the prophet.
Right. Yeah. Um,
But I think only like because like that's what I felt when I read the Red Book. The Red Book, it was me and my best friend. We were uh
mhm.
we were reading it together, and it was like we would read a chapter, and then we would like the very next day have like uh like synchronicity and stuff. We'd have these crazy experiences, and it was like every time we would exchange in dialogue, something would come up, and then we would read the next chapter, and it would come up again. It will strike us, and then it would bring us down into the concrete, and it felt surreal. Like it didn't feel like it felt like I was in a dream. There was no distinction between like I felt like my thoughts were touching like the stars, you know?
Mhm.
And I think when you read Jung carefully like that, and you experience those instances of synchronicity, that's when you say, okay, like you're talking a lot of shit right now, but like I understand where you're coming from, like you can see like we have this and I think we share this, like we're trying to save Young, we're trying to save him. And you can see the language that he's using and stuff, and it gets repetitive, but you see what he experienced. If
Hmm.
like you know those instances of synchronicity that we felt, like this guy was literally in his room tripping balls, looking at like the archetypes that he was, you know, seeing. So like I feel like you can't blame him for the language that he uses, but it's not an excuse nonetheless to not think critically and you know, distance yourself from Jung a little bit and look at what he's using, you know, like the language that he's using. Um, yeah, that's
Well,
crazy. That's crazy. The song when I read that passage, I was like, there's no fucking way that I'm reading this right now. And
yeah,
in the beginning, because I'm so used to it, I'm so used to like seeing stuff like that, where like automatically I'm like, okay, relax. This might not be about you. Read it. And if it hits, it hits. If it doesn't hit, it doesn't hit. Just read it. And I read it, I'm like,
hmm
okay. I wanted to bring it up in our talk, but I was like, you know what? Like, let's actually dissect the text. And I didn't want it to be like a subjective, I didn't want any bias from it. And what's interesting too is that like it was raining a couple of days ago, and I just felt this wave of like depression. I felt so sad.
mm.
And then like, you know, as you're talking, you know, and you're talking about the rain and the raindrops and how you know, the was it the priests were singing, or was it priest or
Yeah, it says priests.
yeah, the
Yeah,
priests singing so that the rain can come down and stuff. And at that time when I was in Montreal, there was any rain, but the songs were
hmm
fringing. The songs were fringing.
The songs are ringing. Okay, good.
The frogs were singing, and there was any rain, you know,
Right,
and you know, maybe I would have been happier that day if I sung out in the morning and the rain came afterward. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right.
Like this is what I feel about my mother. This is what I feel about my